In a quiet verdant suburb, amidst neat houses and manicured lawns, stood the Singer family home, more like a fortress, inhabited by a noisy and loving army of men. The house breathed warmth and comfort, but every morning it was filled with an energetic bustle, conducted by Meg Singer, the tireless and loving mother. Her mornings began long before dawn, when she tiptoed into the kitchen to avoid waking her sleepyheads. The smell of freshly brewed coffee soon spread throughout the house like a melody heralding the beginning of a new day. Meg was like a ship's captain navigating the kitchen chaos, preparing breakfast for her large male crew of 7 sons, each a unique island with his own personality and habits. Joe, the eldest son, almost a man now, was helping Meg. He set the table, made sure the younger ones didn't oversleep, and was generally his mother's right hand. His gaze, usually thoughtful and serious, gave him away as a sensible and responsible man. He dreamed of the future, of going to university, but for now he devoted himself to his family, feeling responsible for the welfare of his brothers. Patrick, the next oldest, was an artist. His room was like a workshop, with paints, brushes, canvases, and sketches lying everywhere. He could sit for hours bent over his easel, forgetting everything. His world was full of colors and images, and he expressed his feelings through art. Meg often said that he lived in his own world, but she loved him for his creative nature and the way he could see beauty in ordinary things. Alfred, the third son, was a genius. His room was like a laboratory, with test tubes, flasks, microscopes, and other scientific instruments everywhere. He spent his days experimenting and exploring the world around him. He was a bit withdrawn and aloof, but his mind was sharp and analytical. He read encyclopedias, solved complex problems, and dreamed of great discoveries. Meg sometimes worried about his social life, but she knew that he was passionate about his work and that he needed time and space for self-development. Percy's fourth son was an athlete. He was constantly running, jumping, playing basketball and American soccer. He was the soul of company, energetic and upbeat. His laughter was infectious and his enthusiasm inexhaustible. He dreamed of becoming a professional athlete and making his family famous. Meg supported his passion for sports, although she sometimes worried about his health and that he would not forget about his studies. Simon, the fifth son, was a musician. He played guitar, wrote songs, and dreamed of fame. He was more quiet and shy than his brothers, but his music spoke for itself. His melodies were tender and touching, filled with longing and hope. Meg loved to listen to him play. She said his music soothed her and gave her peace. Nick, the sixth son, was a tomboy. He was always getting into trouble, messing around and breaking the rules. He was inquisitive and restless, and his energy was boundless. Meg often scolded him for his behavior, but she knew that he was just looking for a way to express himself and that he needed to channel his energy in the right direction. And finally, Harry, the youngest son, was everyone's favorite. He was just a baby and all his brothers cared for him and kept him safe. His innocent eyes and infectious laugh melted the hearts of everyone in the family. Meg cherished him. He was her sunshine, her comfort, and her hope. Soon John Singer, the father of the family, would return to the house. His return was eagerly awaited, like a breath of fresh air after a long drought. John was a military man. He had dedicated his life to serving his country. He was often away on business trips, and his absence was always keenly felt in the house. He was a man of few words and reserved, but his love for his family was boundless. His strong hugs and quiet support were always very important to Meg and the children. He would walk into the house, tired but happy, his face spreading into a smile at the sight of his family. Meg would greet him with love. They would exchange a tender hug with more words than could be spoken aloud. The whole family would gather around the large wooden table where all the Singers would be seated. Breakfast was a time for everyone to be together, to share news and plans for the day. Meg was busy at the stove, pouring coffee and making toast. Joe talked about his academic success, Patrick showed his new drawings, Alfred shared the results of his experiments, Percy bragged about his sporting achievements, Simon played a new tune on his guitar, Nick told about his adventures, and Harry just smiled and reached for his father. John listened to everyone attentively, asking questions and giving advice. There was an atmosphere of love, understanding, and family warmth in the air. This morning ritual was their anchor that kept them together despite all of life's storms, but the idyll couldn't last forever. A sudden phone call, abrupt and disturbing, broke into the peaceful atmosphere. John picked up the phone, listened to the message and turned pale. His eyes reflected a terror that seemed to freeze time around him. He learned that Percy, their athletic and vivacious son, had gone missing while serving in the army. The words spoken into the telephone receiver flew around the room like shards of a broken mirror, tearing apart their happy world. The news hit the family like a thunderclap. Meg was overcome with horror and despair. Her world went dark in an instant. She could not believe what had happened, refused to accept this terrible reality. She screamed in pain like a wounded animal and began to cry inconsolably, unable to stop the flow of tears. John, usually reserved and strong, tried to support his wife, but he himself was deeply shaken. He hugged Meg and tried to comfort her, but his words seemed powerless in the face of her grief. At that moment he felt helpless, unable to protect his family from the impending disaster. When the brothers heard the news, they froze in a daze, as if struck by an electric current. Each in his own way experienced what had happened, each felt their common world cracking at the seams. Joe, as the eldest, tried to pull himself together and support his parents, but his words of comfort sounded unconvincing. He felt that words were meaningless in the face of such tragedy. Patrick, shaken, locked himself in his room and began to paint, trying to express his pain and fear through art. His canvas became his confessional. Alfred, withdrew into his thoughts, trying to rationalize what had happened, to find logic in the chaos, but to no avail. Simon sat down at his guitar and began to play a sad melody, pouring his sadness and longing into the music. His guitar became his voice. Nick, not realizing the gravity of the situation, just stayed silent and looked at his parents, feeling their pain but not knowing how to help them. Harry cried, feeling the shared grief, his little heart breaking with uncertainty and fear. Meg, unable to bear the unknown, decided to act. She decided to go to the army unit where Percy was stationed, to get some information about his whereabouts and to make sense of what had happened. She hoped that they would be able to tell her something reassuring, that they would give her some hope. John, realizing her need for action, stayed home with the rest of his sons, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, although in his heart he felt the same pain and anxiety as Meg. He realized that he had to be strong for his children, that he had to be their support during this difficult time. In the army unit, Meg encountered bureaucracy and formal attitudes. She was given no specific details, talked in generalities and referred to rules. She felt helpless and desperate, as if she had been slammed against a wall of indifference. She insisted on meeting with the commanders, demanding explanations, but all her efforts were in vain. She was told that an investigation was underway and told to wait, but it was unbearable to wait, each minute dragging on like an eternity. Frustrated and tired, Meg returned home without any encouraging information. She felt deceived and abandoned, as if she had been betrayed by those to whom she had entrusted her son. She realized that no one wanted to help her, and that she had to fight for her son herself, that she had to become a warrior for his sake. She walked into the house, broken and devastated, but with a new sense of determination. The house had an oppressive atmosphere that you could touch with your hands. The silence was deafening, interrupted only by Harry's quiet sobs and the muffled sounds of Simon's guitar. Each member of the family was experiencing it in their own way, withdrawn as if in a shell. Joe tried to support his father, but his words of comfort sounded formal and lifeless, and he felt useless. Patrick continued to paint, expressing his feelings through art, creating dark and disturbing pictures that reflected his inner world. Alfred spent his days in his room, immersed in scientific research, trying to find a way to connect with Percy, as if science could bring him back. Simon played guitar, pouring his sadness and longing into his music, his melodies becoming increasingly sad and tearful. Nick walked around the house like a shadow, trying not to draw attention to himself, feeling guilty that he was alive and Percy was missing. Harry kept asking about Percy, not understanding why he wasn't around, and his questions tore at Meg's heart. Meg couldn't find a place for herself and began to reminisce about the past. She went through old photographs, looking at Percy's childhood things, remembering the happy times they had spent together. She blamed herself for not keeping her son safe, tormented by guilt, as if she had sent him off to war. It seemed to her that she had missed something, that she had not finished something, that she could have changed something. She could not bear the thought that Percy might be dead. The thought haunted her like a nightmare. John, seeing his wife's suffering, tried to be there to support her, but he felt helpless. He realized that no words could comfort Meg, that she needed time to cope with her grief. He just put his arms around her and held her close, letting her feel his love and support. He was her rock in the raging ocean. He remembered Percy too, his smile, his laughter, his energy. He saw his face before him as he left to serve and felt his heart break with pain. He was proud of his son and he hoped he was alive. He believed in his strength and resilience.